welcome to the Media Peruana Knits YouTube channel. I am here today to talk to you about yarn and yarn labels. So this video may be more useful for newer knitters, but even more experienced knitters may learn something new. So when you buy yarn in the wild, it is usually, or at least hopefully, labeled, and there's lots of useful information on that label that you may not be aware of, or you may just be unsure what it means, because sometimes, especially if you are a newer knitter, there are a lot of abbreviations being used, there are symbols being used, and you're just not sure what this label is trying to tell you. They can also sometimes be in a foreign language. So I just wanted to do a quick video about some of the information you might find on a yarn label, what it means, and what information you should specifically be looking for on your yarn labels. So to start with, there's basically kind of two different kinds of yarn. There is yarn that is produced by larger companies, which is sort of a mass production kind of thing. And then there is yarn that is produced by indie dyers, which is usually a very small, maybe just one person, handful of people producing the yarn. So there's no standard information that has to be included on a yarn label, but yarn labels from larger producers tend to have quite a bit of the same information and are a little bit more standard looking. So if you have a smaller company, so this, for example, I wouldn't say it's quite indie dye, but it is a smaller company, Hudson and West, and the information included on their label is a lot different than the information included on this label, which is Gilead from Durarum Natura, which is a larger yarn producer, and is also in French, but that's not super relevant here, and has information on its label that is a little bit more standardized, in keeping with what you might find at in a larger craft store, a Michael's, a Joann's, things like that. So, and sort of in line with that, we then have this yarn, which is from Knit Picks, which is a large producer, but actually has some different information that is sometimes not found on those sort of mass production labels. The basic information that should be on your yarn label, no matter where it's from, is the contents of the yarn, and this can be something really basic. This one, for example, says 100% wool. It's 100% wool. Whereas this label has some very specific information about the wool. It is 70% US Merino, 30% US Corriedale. So it's telling you the kind of wool, basically the kind of sheep breed. It's also telling you the exact distribution, and it's telling you where that wool was produced. And then back to our Knit Picks label, it also just says 100% wool, but it specifies that it's eco wool. So the bare minimum that your yarn label should be telling you is what's in your yarn. Is it wool? Is it acrylic? Is it alpaca? Is it, it should tell you the contents. Ideally, it should tell you the exact makeup, how much of each of those things are involved. The next bit of information that your label should definitely be telling you is something about the weight of your wool. So when I say weight, I'm basically referring to the thickness of the strand of yarn, or the diameter of kind of that strand of yarn. So whether it's a thinner yarn that's maybe used for socks, or it's a thicker yarn that is maybe used for sweaters, there should be some indicator there. This can come in a lot of different forms. So for example, this one tells you right there, worsted weight. Of course, that depends on you knowing what worsted weight is. And then on the back, it has this little dealie right here, which says 4. If you're not familiar with this, I'm going to try to pop the graphic in here. This is a sort of yarn standard. Each starting out with the lowest number is the thinnest yarn, and then as you get higher numbers, the yarn gets thicker. So for example, if I were looking at a yarn label that was in a foreign language, maybe I couldn't really read it. If it had that number on there, I would be able to tell what it is. Unfortunately, in this case, this yarn doesn't tell me that. However, it does tell me what size needles I should use and the approximate tension I should get on the yarn using those needles. So a 4 to a 5 millimeter needle is a US 6 to 8, and it is telling me 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters should give me, that's weird, it does it backwards, 17 to 19 stitches and 25 to 27 rows. It does say those things in French, but it's pretty obvious. This one is telling me the same thing, but it has the number as well. So 4, which is basically what all of these are, is a worsted weight. However, if you didn't know that, it's also telling you what a good gauge would be for this yarn, which is also, as you learn more about yarn, you'll come to know that, 4 to 5 stitches to the inch, that's usually around a worsted weight. So basically there are different ways that the yarn is going to tell you its ideal usage in terms of its weight. It might say worsted weight, it might say the number 4, it might give you an ideal gauge, or tension is sometimes called. In the case of the Knit Picks yarn, it tells you all of those things. It says worsted weight on one side, it has the 4 on the other, and then it tells you the needle size, which is 6 to 9 and 4.5 stitches to the inch. So basically, if you want to know the weight of your yarn, even if it doesn't specifically say a worsted weight or something like that, you can look for the number in the little ball of yarn. You can also check what the recommended gauge is. So let's say you're shopping for a specific pattern. It's going to tell you what gauge you're aiming for, and then you can look for yarns that indicate that they ideally work up at that same gauge, even if they don't happen to say worsted or DK or fingering weight or whatever that information that you're looking for. The next thing that your yarn really should have on the label is care instructions. All of these do. I can't promise you that every single yarn label in the world does, but it really absolutely should tell you how to take care of your yarn. So this one simply says, care, hand wash, lay flat to dry. The Knit Picks label has the instructions, but it also has the symbols, which I believe are somewhat universal. So maybe if you didn't speak English, you would still be able to see it has the little hand wash symbol, and then it has the dry flat symbol as well. So you know how to take care of your yarn, even if you have no ability to read the English. The Gilead also has, pull this out of here, also has the written instructions. Of course, they are in French, but you can see it also has the little hand wash symbol there as well. The other bit of information that absolutely positively has to be on your yarn is how much you have, how much you are getting. So in the US, this is generally imperial. Some places are also going to include the metric, and of course outside the US, everything's going to be metric and might include the imperial, but it should tell you how many yards or meters of yarn you have. So let's see. The Gilead says 250 meters for a 100 gram, well, I guess it's a ball, but I don't know what ENV is an abbreviation for. The Hudson and West is telling you both the yards and the meters, and the weight, and the Knitpicks as well. Knitpicks I don't think includes the metric, but it does obviously have the, is that right side up? Nope. But it does obviously have the imperial. You absolutely need to know that information so that you can get enough yarn for your project. Those are really the key things that your yarn label absolutely should have. Some indicator of its contents, an indicator of the weight or the ideal gauge, and an indicator of how to care for the yarn. And all of those things should be relatively accessible even if you don't speak the language. So there, in an ideal world, perhaps, should be some universal symbols, basic things that enable you to figure out what is happening, even if you don't read the language. Here in the US, of course, a lot of yarn is US based, so it's less of a concern for us. Might be more of a concern if you are an English speaker living abroad, or if you are someone from abroad who has come here to the US and is looking at your yarn labels. Some other information that may be included. Your yarn should have either a colorway name or a number. And what's really important here is that it has a dye lot. So this is something you're going to see more in commercial yarns, but no matter how much you try to keep the conditions of your yarn dyeing process absolutely identical, it doesn't always work out that way. So the yarn is dyed in batches, and the batches are given lot numbers. Why does this matter? If you run out of yarn and you need to buy more, if you just buy the same colorway, it might actually be identical. It may not match. There may be slight differences. However, if you know the dye lot of your colorway, then you can look for that specific dye lot. You will know all of that yarn was dyed together at the same time, and your color is going to be more uniform. So if we're talking about some indie dyed yarn that is lots of crazy variegated colors, it doesn't really work so well. Indie dyed yarn tend to be dyed in small batches of like 4 or 5 skeins at a time, maybe get 10. It's not. And when you use indie dyed yarn, you're really supposed to alternate skeins anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you are using a commercial yarn, you might want to look and see if you have a dye lot. So for example, the Gilead, it says the color name, which is, I don't know how to pronounce in French, but it's sage, and then it has that lot number under it. So if I needed to buy more of this for a project, I would have my dye lot. In the case of this wool from Knitpicks, it has all kinds of stuff going on. It has a color name, which is Winkle. It has a color number, and then it tells you the lot number as well. And then for the forge, they don't actually have a lot number, but it tells you a batch number. So any kind of information like that is going to enable you to hopefully match colors. If you don't, ideally you want to buy all your yarn at the same time, so from the same place, so that it all matches. But if that, you happen to run out of yarn, having that batch number, lot number, something to help you kind of match is really going to come in handy. Things that you might find on your yarn information. This is really going to be more of your small batch producers, or producers who are doing something out of the ordinary. Most commercial yarns are plied yarns, and they are worsted spun yarns. It's a very kind of uniform way of producing yarn. Other kinds of yarns, again, maybe that are done in small batches, or my small producers, they might do things a little bit differently. There may be a different number of plies than your usual. You might have a 2-ply or a 4-ply or a single ply. And perhaps as a new knitter, that is not of interest to you, but it may be someday. And I will include a link here to my video about yarn construction and yarn substitution and why this information might be useful. But if you don't want to necessarily examine the yarn yourself, it is helpful if they tell you right up front how the yarn is constructed. Is it a worsted spun? Is it a woolen spun? How many plies are in it? It's going to give you information about the shape and structure of your yarn that you might find useful when deciding on yarns to use for a project. So other information that might be included. So for example, this Knit Picks is telling me that it is some kind of eco-verified, eco-quality wool. That may be of interest to you. It's also telling me where it was made. So this is from, it was made in Peru. The Hudson and West Forge has all kinds of information. It's telling you that the wool comes from the United States. It's telling you it's been spun in Buffalo, Wyoming, and that it was dyed in Rutherford, North Carolina. So if that is something that is important to you, where exactly your yarn comes from, where its contents come from, how it's produced, you're getting a little bit more information there. The Gilead, again, is in French. My French is not great. Basically, it's telling you that it is made from merino, from a specific kind of merino sheep that are raised in Provence, where it is dyed. Again, not in English, but the information is there if it is something that is of interest to you. And I believe if you go to their website, they have this information actually in English. It's been a long time since I studied French. So that's all extra information that you don't necessarily need, but for various reasons you might like to have about where and how the materials are sourced, where and how it's produced, where the style of spinning, the structure of your yarn, all extra information that is not necessary in order to make an appropriate purchase for your project, but that you might find helpful, especially as you get more involved in knitting and start to have more opinions about what kinds of yarns you like and how you like them to be produced and where you like them to be sourced. Shh! And things like that. So that is my quick overview of information that is contained in yarn labels, how to find the information that you need to be able to purchase yarn for your project, and some of the extra kind of information that might be included there as well. So hopefully the next time you are shopping for yarn, you won't get too overwhelmed. You know what to look for and where to find the information, what it means, and what information is maybe extra and not super essential to your purchase. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. I have lots more videos here on the channel telling you all about yarn and knitting and all of that good stuff. So if you enjoyed this, I hope you will give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for past and future knitting related tutorials. See you next time.